Europe, 1942. The war was no longer a distant thunder on the horizon. It had arrived. It had boots. It had uniforms. It had flags hanging from government buildings that did not belong there. From the streets of Paris to the countryside of Poland, from the ports of Norway to the villages of France, much of the continent stood under the shadow of one symbol, the iron grip of Nazi occupation. In cities like Paris, cafes still served coffee, trams still ran on schedule, children still played in narrow alleyways. On the surface, life appeared almost normal, but it was a carefully managed illusion. Because behind every corner stood a soldier, behind every newspaper headline was propaganda, and behind every conversation, fear. German military rule was precise, bureaucratic, and ruthless. Orders were posted in town squares. Curfews were enforced with absolute authority. After dark, the streets emptied, windows dimmed, doors locked early. If you were caught outside after curfew without papers, you didn't argue, you didn't ask questions, you hoped. Checkpoints became part of daily life, wooden barriers across rural roads, sandbags at bridges, armed patrols stopping bicycles, carts, automobiles. Papers, please, identity cards, work permits, travel authorization. A missing stamp could mean detention. A suspicious glance could mean interrogation. On highways and village roads, German military vehicles moved constantly, troop transports, staff cars, supply convoys. Officers traveled between command posts, carrying reports and orders that shaped the occupation machine. And yet, beneath this machinery of control, something quieter was forming. Resistance. Not loud, not uniform, not always organized, but alive. In apartments above bakeries, in farmhouses beyond the tree line, in basements beneath shuttered shops, small groups of ordinary citizens began to push back. Teachers, railway workers, students, mothers, clerks. They sabotaged rail lines, they forged documents, they hid fugitives, they passed information. Because information was power. And in occupied Europe, information was tightly controlled. Radios were confiscated, foreign broadcasts were banned, listening to the BBC could mean arrest, spreading Allied news could mean execution. The occupiers understood something fundamental: control the airwaves, control the narrative. But the resistance understood something even more powerful: control the message, and you control hope. Covert communication became the lifeline of underground networks. Messages had to move from village to city, from city to border, from occupied territory to London. Couriers carried microfilm hidden inside toothpaste tubes. Codes were sewn into coat linings. Invisible ink dried silently on thin sheets of paper. But nothing was more valuable or more dangerous than a radio transmitter. A suitcase radio could reach hundreds of miles. It could speak directly to Allied command. It could report troop movements, supply shortages, defensive positions. One transmission could redirect a bombing raid. One message could save a battalion. One signal could change the timing of an invasion. But a radio was also a beacon. German counterintelligence units roamed the streets in detection vans equipped with direction-finding equipment. The moment an illegal signal was transmitted, invisible waves traveled through the night, and so did the hunters. Operators had minutes, sometimes less. They would set up the transmitter in an attic or cellar, attach wires to makeshift antennas, tap out coded Morse signals with steady fingers, then pack everything immediately, because once the signal was detected, triangulation began. Street by street, block by block. Doors would be kicked in, neighbors questioned, entire buildings searched. If the radio was found, there was no misunderstanding, no negotiation. Carrying an illegal transmitter was not considered a minor offense. It was espionage, and espionage meant death. Public executions were staged as warnings. Posters announced arrests. Names were printed in newspapers to instill fear. The message was clear. Resistance would be crushed. And yet, it continued, because the occupied roads of Europe were not just military supply routes, they were arteries of silent defiance. A woman cycling through the countryside might not just be visiting family. A farmer repairing a fence might be observing troop movements. A traveler with a suitcase might be carrying something far more powerful than clothing. Every journey carried risk. Imagine walking toward a checkpoint with forbidden technology hidden inches from your hands, hearing the crunch of boots on gravel, seeing a uniform step into your path. Open the bag. Your pulse rises. Your breathing must not. Inside that suitcase could be a compact transmitter, wires, coils, batteries, all disguised beneath fabric and personal belongings. If discovered, you would not simply be arrested, you would disappear into interrogation rooms, into prison cells, into history as a warning to others. This was the reality of occupied Europe, a continent where roads were watched, where voices were monitored, where silence was safer than speech. But silence could not win a war. So the resistance spoke, quietly, carefully, courageously, through hidden radios and coded signals. And every time someone chose to carry one of those transmitters across a guarded road, they accepted a simple truth. If they were caught, there would be no second chance. The penalty was clear. The danger was absolute. The risk was personal. Yet still, they traveled. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon in a war of armies and tanks is not a division of soldiers. It is a signal in the dark. And on these occupied roads of Europe, that signal was about to be carried in the most unexpected way. In war, suspicion has a pattern. It looks for uniforms. It looks for men of military age. It looks for defiance in the eyes. It rarely looks at a well-dressed woman carrying a suitcase. That was the blind spot. Across occupied Europe, resistance leaders began to understand something crucial. The enemy's expectations were predictable. German officers were trained to look for sabotage among factory workers, railway engineers, former soldiers. But a school teacher? A seamstress? A quiet woman traveling alone? She was invisible. Recruitment into the underground rarely happened dramatically. There were no grand speeches, no ceremonies, just quiet questions. Do you trust me? Do you want to help? Sometimes it began with delivering food, then carrying letters, then memorizing names. Each step small, each step irreversible. For many women in the resistance, the decision was personal. A brother arrested, a father disappeared, a city humiliated under occupation. Patriotism was not abstract, it was daily. Once recruited, training began, quickly, efficiently, secretly. Some were trained locally in basements and barns. Others were sent across borders, eventually reaching Britain, where organizations like the Special Operations Executive prepared agents for insertion back into Europe. They were taught surveillance detection, how to know if someone was following, how to vary walking patterns, how to use reflections in shop windows to scan behind them without turning their head. They learned codes, complex encryption systems built on poetry, random word sequences, and number grids. A single mistake in transmission could expose an entire network. They practiced assembling and disassembling radio transmitters in minutes, because speed meant survival. The radios themselves were marvels of compact engineering, foldable Morse keys, crystal-controlled transmitters, coils and wires that could be disguised inside everyday objects. Some were hidden in bread boxes, others in false-bottom suitcases. To anyone else, it looked like luggage. To the resistance, it was a lifeline. Operating one required calm under extreme pressure. Morse code had to be sent steadily, not too slow, not too rushed. Hands could not shake. Panic could not creep into the rhythm. Because German signal detection units were listening. The occupiers had mobile tracking teams, trucks equipped with rotating antennas, scanning the air for illegal frequencies. The moment a transmission began, it triggered a hunt. An operator had roughly 20 minutes, sometimes less. Set up, transmit, dismantle, move. The women selected for this work were not chosen for strength. They were chosen for discipline, for memory, for composure, and for their ability to appear ordinary. Ordinary was the perfect disguise. A modest dress, proper posture, calm voice, travel documents neatly presented, no sudden movements. German officers, shaped by their own assumptions, often underestimated them. Many believed espionage was a man's game. Many believed women were peripheral to war. That arrogance created opportunity, but it did not reduce danger. If captured, female agents were treated no more leniently than male operatives. Interrogations were brutal. Torture was common. Deportation to camps was frequent. Execution was not rare. Yet still they volunteered, because they understood something the occupiers did not. War was not only fought on battlefields. It was fought in whispers, in coded signals, in the quiet courage of those willing to carry invisible weapons. And so, one such woman receives her assignment. A suitcase sits on a wooden table in a dimly lit room. It looks unremarkable, slightly worn leather, modest, practical. Inside, beneath folded clothing, is a transmitter capable of reaching hundreds of miles. She is told her route. She is told her contact. She is told the frequency. And she is told one final truth. If you are stopped, you are alone. No rescue, no negotiation, no acknowledgement. If captured, her name may never be spoken publicly. Her mission may never be confirmed. She nods, because this is the cost of invisible war. As she closes the suitcase, there is no dramatic music, no applause, just the quiet snap of metal clasps locking shut. In that sound is risk. In that sound is defiance. And soon she will step onto a road controlled entirely by the enemy, carrying a signal that could alter the course of operations far beyond the horizon. A woman no one suspects, a weapon no one sees, and a journey that will test the limits of nerve and silence.
The road is quiet, too quiet. Dust drifts in the afternoon light as she walks, suitcase in hand. The countryside stretches outward, fields, hedgerows, distant farmhouses. Every step feels louder than it should. She knows the checkpoints ahead. She knows patrol routes change without warning. Traveling alone is risky. But then, the low hum of an engine. A staff car approaches. Dark paint, military plates, an officer inside. It slows. In occupied Europe, refusing a German officer could raise suspicion. Accepting could invite danger. The window rolls down. A polite offer, a controlled smile. Fräulein, may I offer you a ride? In that moment, calculations race behind steady eyes. If she declines, he may insist. If she accepts, she enters a confined space, inches away from authority, from inspection, from discovery. She nods. The door opens. She steps inside. The suitcase rests near her feet. Inside that case, wires, crystals, a transmitter that could condemn her within seconds. The car moves. The officer begins conversation, casual at first, questions about destination, family, work. His tone is relaxed, confident, perhaps even charming. She answers carefully, not too brief, not too detailed, every word measured. Outside, the landscape passes in controlled motion. Inside, tension builds invisibly. A bump in the road shifts the suitcase slightly. His eyes glance downward. A pause. It is a small pause, perhaps 2 seconds, but in those seconds exists a lifetime of consequences. "Traveling far?" he asks. She smiles faintly, explains she is visiting relatives. The suitcase contains clothing, personal items, nothing interesting. He considers this. Officers were trained to detect lies, but they were also human, and humans rely on instinct shaped by bias. A well-spoken woman, calm posture, proper documentation. Does she look like a spy? The car approaches a checkpoint ahead. Soldiers wave vehicles through, saluting the officer's rank. Power protects proximity. In another circumstance, she might have been ordered out, the suitcase opened, contents examined piece by piece. Instead, the uniform beside her acts as a shield. Irony rides in the back seat. The man who represents the occupying force, the system hunting illegal radios, is unknowingly transporting one. Conversation continues. He speaks of routine matters, perhaps complaints about fuel shortages, perhaps confidence in German control. Arrogance, subtle but present. Occupation breathes certainty, the belief that resistance is fragmented, weak, doomed. He does not ask to inspect the bag. He does not reach down. He does not look inside. The road narrows as they approach a junction. She mentions this is where she must depart. The car slows. Gravel crunches. She thanks him politely, steps out, lifts the suitcase. The door closes. For a brief second, their eyes meet through the window. Does he suspect? Does he wonder? Or does he simply see another civilian grateful for assistance? The engine hums away. Dust rises again. And just like that, the most dangerous part of her journey ends, not with confrontation, not with violence, but with assumption. He never looked in the bag. But the danger is not over, because ahead lies the real mission, assembling the transmitter, sending the message, racing against detection teams that scan the night for forbidden signals. She adjusts her grip on the suitcase and walks toward her destination. Behind her, the officer drives on, unaware that history passed through his passenger seat. On occupied roads, survival often depends not on force, but on being underestimated. And tonight, somewhere in the dark, a signal will rise into the air, carried safely past checkpoints by the very enemy determined to silence it.
Night falls differently in occupied territory. It does not arrive gently. It does not feel peaceful. Darkness in wartime Europe is both protection and threat. The village settles into silence. Windows are shuttered. Lamps are dimmed behind thick curtains to avoid attention. The curfew bell has already echoed through the streets. Somewhere in the distance, a patrol passes, boots striking cobblestone in steady rhythm. And inside a modest house at the edge of town, a suitcase is placed carefully on a wooden table. The locks click open. Beneath folded clothes, beneath ordinary belongings, lies something extraordinary. Metal components wrapped in cloth, coiled wires, a compact Morse key, crystal-controlled transmitter parts. This is not just equipment, it is a voice. She moves quickly, but not hurriedly. Panic causes mistakes. Mistakes cause noise. Noise attracts death. First, the curtains are checked again. No sliver of light escapes. A blanket is pushed against the bottom of the door. The radio components are laid out in precise order. She has rehearsed this dozens of times. Assembling the transmitter takes minutes, but they feel like seconds stolen from fate. Each wire must connect perfectly, each contact tightened, each crystal frequency selected according to prearranged schedule. Across the English Channel, in London, operators from the Special Operations Executive wait at listening stations, headphones pressed tight, pencils ready, clocks synchronized. They know an agent is scheduled to transmit tonight, but they do not know if she made it. Back in the dimly lit room, she attaches a thin antenna wire. It snakes upward toward the attic beam, barely visible in shadow. Power source connected. She takes a breath. The Morse key rests beneath her fingers. Outside, the wind brushes tree branches against the roof. Every sound feels amplified. Then, the first signal. Short. Long. Short. Dots and dashes travel invisibly into the sky. Her coded message contains critical information: troop rotations observed near rail lines, fuel shortages at a nearby depot, increased patrol patterns along the Western Road. Each letter is deliberate, because speed is survival. German counterintelligence units are not passive. Throughout occupied cities, specialized tracking teams operate from unmarked vans. Inside these vehicles are rotating direction-finding antennas, scanning, listening, hunting. The moment an illegal transmission begins, instruments react. Needles twitch, headphones crackle, operators exchange glances. There. They triangulate. One signal alone gives a direction, 2 gives a line, 3 narrows it to a block. Time shrinks. Inside the house, she continues transmitting. Sweat beads at her temple, but her hand remains steady. A mistake in rhythm could force repetition, and repetition wastes seconds she does not have. In London, the receiving operator scribbles down coded groups of letters and numbers. No emotion, no reaction, just speed. The message is nearly complete. Outside, miles away, a tracking van turns onto a narrow road. The hunt has begun. Back in the room, she finishes the final sequence. End transmission code sent. Silence. Immediately, she disconnects power, antenna wire pulled down, components disassembled with disciplined efficiency. The transmitter disappears back into the suitcase, now once again nothing more than luggage. Boots sound faintly in the distance. A vehicle engine approaches. She does not freeze. Freezing is suspicion. Instead, she moves calmly to the kitchen, pours water into a kettle, places it on the stove. An ordinary sound. An ordinary action. Headlights sweep briefly across the curtained windows. The vehicle slows, then continues past. The tracking team is close, but not close enough, because she transmitted quickly, because she moved immediately, because hesitation kills. Minutes later, the village returns to stillness. In London, analysts begin decrypting the message. The intelligence confirms Allied suspicions about supply vulnerabilities. It may influence bombing priorities. It may shape operational planning. A single transmission from a small house under occupation ripples outward into strategic decisions. This is the invisible battlefield. No trenches, no artillery, no headlines, just signals in the dark. But the risk does not end with one message. Radio operators are the most hunted members of the resistance. German forces understand their importance. Captured radios are studied, codes are broken, networks infiltrated. Many operators last only weeks before detection. Some last days. They move constantly. Attic tonight, farmhouse tomorrow, abandoned warehouse next week.
Sleep becomes irregular, trust becomes fragile. Neighbors might collaborate, informants might listen, even a curious glance can become a report. And if captured, radio operators face the harshest interrogations, not for revenge, but for information. Names, frequencies, contacts, locations. One broken link can unravel an entire network. She knows this, yet still she prepares for the next scheduled transmission. Because without communication, resistance fractures. Without communication, allies operate blindly. Without communication, hope fades. Night after night across occupied Europe, similar scenes unfold. In basements in Paris, in barns across rural Poland, in apartments overlooking silent streets. Hidden radios pulse quietly against tyranny. Every signal risks exposure, every message risks execution, but every transmission also proves something powerful. Control is never absolute. The occupiers can patrol roads, they can enforce curfews, they can arrest and intimidate, but they cannot fully silence a determined voice carried through invisible waves. As dawn approaches, she closes the suitcase once more. The radio rests quietly inside. To anyone who sees her tomorrow, she will appear ordinary again, walking down a controlled street, passing armed soldiers, carrying nothing more threatening than personal belongings. But inside that case lies a weapon the enemy fears more than a pistol: information. And somewhere in the distance, German tracking units recalibrate their equipment, frustrated. They were close, very close. They will try again tomorrow, and so will she. Because in a war dominated by armies and steel, sometimes the most decisive battles are fought in darkness, with nothing more than courage, timing, and a signal in the night.
Wars are remembered by generals, by invasions, by tanks crossing borders, by flags raised over ruined capitals. But wars are often decided by people whose names are barely recorded. People who never commanded divisions, who never wore medals in public, who fought without uniforms. The story of one woman carrying a radio through occupied territory is not unique. It is part of a much larger, quieter army. Across Europe, thousands of civilians formed resistance networks. Some sabotaged rail lines before major operations. Others hid downed Allied pilots. Many transmitted intelligence that shaped strategic decisions. Before major Allied offensives, including operations that would later unfold in places like Normandy, resistance radio traffic intensified. Rail movements were tracked, fuel depots mapped, defensive positions reported. These messages did not appear in newspapers, but they appeared on commanders' desks. In Britain, organizations like the Special Operations Executive trained and deployed agents specifically to set Europe ablaze through sabotage and intelligence gathering. Many of those agents were women. They parachuted into hostile territory. They operated alone. They relied on strangers for shelter. And many never returned. If discovered, the consequences were severe. Captured radio operators were often classified as spies rather than soldiers, meaning no protection under standard rules of war. Interrogation was designed to extract networks. Because resistance was never just one person, it was interconnected. A courier trusted a safe house trusted a signal operator, an operator trusted a code clerk in London. Break one link, the chain collapses. That is why carrying a radio was so dangerous. It was not just about personal survival, it was about protecting everyone else. Imagine for a moment if the officer in that staff car had opened the suitcase. Imagine the locks clicking open. Clothing lifted, false lining discovered, metal glinting beneath fabric. The arrest would have been immediate, the interrogation inevitable, names demanded,
locations pressured from silence. Perhaps she would have resisted. Many did. Some endured unimaginable hardship without speaking. But the risk was real. Entire cells were wiped out because of one discovery. And yet, history shows that resistance endured. Despite infiltration, despite betrayal, despite execution. Why? Because occupation breeds control, but it also breeds defiance. The psychological power of underestimation became one of the resistance's greatest advantages. Women, especially, were often dismissed by occupying officers as harmless civilians. That miscalculation allowed networks to function longer than expected. A woman on a bicycle might carry microfilm. A mother pushing a cart might conceal ammunition. A traveler with a suitcase might hold a transmitter capable of reaching London. The battlefield was everywhere. Streets, kitchens, train platforms, country roads. And heroism did not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looked like keeping your voice steady in a moving car, like answering questions calmly while sitting inches from discovery, like tapping Morse code in a darkened room while knowing a van with antennas might already be turning down your street. These were invisible acts, but invisible does not mean insignificant. Modern warfare analysts now recognize how critical human intelligence was to Allied planning. Satellite imagery did not exist. Real-time surveillance did not exist. Information came from people, from courage, from signals transmitted in secret. And while massive offensives capture history's attention, they often relied on foundations built quietly by resistance networks. The officer who gave her a ride likely never knew what passed through his vehicle that day. He never knew that arrogance, routine, and assumption had allowed the enemy's message to travel safely. He never knew that history sometimes moves in small, unnoticed moments. A decision not to inspect a bag, a choice to underestimate, a glance that lingers but does not question. War is often portrayed as a clash of massive forces, but sometimes it is decided by individual seconds. Seconds of courage, seconds of hesitation, seconds of blind spots. The woman with the suitcase may never appear in official battle reports. Her name may be lost, changed, or sealed in archives, but her impact lived beyond that road. Because every successful transmission strengthened resistance. Every successful journey proved that occupation was not absolute, and every unseen act of bravery chipped away at the illusion of total control. When the war finally ended, when cities were liberated and flags removed, many resistance members returned quietly to ordinary life. No parades, no recognition, just silence. Invisible in war, invisible in peace, but not forgotten by history. Because behind every great military campaign lies a shadow network of unnamed individuals who carried risks too heavy for headlines. And on one occupied road, in the back seat of an enemy officer's car, the balance between life and death rested inside a simple suitcase. He never looked in the bag. And because of that, the signal survived.